But first, Judge, Donald Trump is a man who you have met personally, privately with many times in Trump Tower. He's a man who's asked for your advice when it comes to Supreme Court picks. With libertarians, there are many negatives, but there are also many positives. It's difficult to know whether or not Donald Trump running is a net good thing, with his views on taxes and regulations, or a bad thing, his views on trade and economics. So I guess I should ask you, Judge, as somebody who knows him better than most, what's your impression of his announcement last night?
I wish he weren't running, Austin. If he is the Republican nominee in 2024 against President Biden seeking reelection, I believe that the issue in most people's minds will be Trump, his character, his potential criminal liability, and his personality, and not what did Joe Biden do as the president of the United States in the last 4 years. I think this would be a dream for the Democrats. You know, I register as a Republican and I vote in the Republican primary often because I have friends who are running in Republican primaries in New Jersey. But I haven't voted for a Republican for president since Ronald Reagan in 1984. I voted for the Libertarian because of my view that the Republican Party is just another big government party. Trump is the opposite of a libertarian. And I say this as someone who's known him well for 35 years and whom, as you say, he called many times. He interviewed me twice for the Supreme Court of the United States and then sought my views on the others whom he eventually nominated. He's an authoritarian. I mean, that's the opposite of a libertarian. But for Republicans, this couldn't come at a worse time. It will exacerbate the divide amongst them caused by their dismal showing in the midterms. It will juice up the Democratic turnout in the runoff in Georgia between Senator Warnock and Herschel Walker, President Trump's handpicked candidate to oppose him. I think this is a narcissistic endeavor that he should have held back on for at least a year to see how events go. But he's been advised that the DOJ will have a more difficult time indicting him if he's running against the incumbent president of the United States. I think that view is hogwash, but I know lawyers that are advancing that argument to him. And he likes to be the center of attention, which what he did last night will help him to do.
If you're just tuning in, I'm speaking to Judge Andrew Napolitano, who is definitely not holding back this morning on Donald Trump. Now, if I could push back with you on just a moment, Judge, and the views of him as an authoritarian, from a rhetoric perspective, I think that you can't be argued with there. But I could argue with you when it comes to the question of him being an authoritarian and in nominating the most libertarian Supreme Court justice, perhaps in history, Neil Gorsuch. Donald Trump reformed taxes even more than Ronald Reagan did. He pushed for regulation. He pushed for normalization deals between Israel and the Gulf states. He beat Hillary Clinton, and he also, to his credit, Judge, was he passed the First Step Act, which was a major criminal justice reform push that I think a lot of libertarians agree with. So, I mean, do all of those things? Do you dismiss those things when in your analysis of him?
No, no, I don't dismiss those things, except for taxes, because where I live, taxes went up because we have the highest real estate and state income taxes in the union, and they're no longer deductible against your adjusted gross income for federal purposes. But that's just unique to New York, New Jersey, and California. It's the price I pay for living in this People's Republic of New Jersey.
But
Everything
Judge,
you
on the First Step Act, though, I mean that in itself is huge. Right to try,
he,
another
he and
example.
he and I talked about this at great length. It was a terrific thing to do. This resulted in letting people out of jail who shouldn't have been in jail in the first place. This is a reversal of a portion of the drug laws that were enacted by a Republican Congress and President Bill Clinton, which imposed lengthy jail sentences for simple possession of marijuana, which is now legal in 2/3 of the country. Um, yes, he does have a libertarian streak in him. He's in favor of a gay marriage because, as he said to me, it's none of the government's blankety blank. I won't use the actual word he used. This on your show, business, who you get married to, and of course he's right. It is none of the government's business. So in some areas, yes, there were libertarian instincts. Did he understand government? No. Is he conversant with the Constitution? Absolutely not. Can he use the Justice Department as a plaything to torment his adversaries? Well, a lot of presidents have done that. He attempted to do it as well. But did government grow under Donald Trump? Yes, it did. Did he borrow money? How about $1 trillion in 4 years with no war? So the path of government growing and in our face and in our lives not only didn't stop, not only didn't go backwards, it continued to go forward.
Well, as Jefferson said, it is the tendency of government to grow and for liberty to shrink. It would probably take more than just one man in that position of power to shrink the size of government. We would also need a Congress
Oh,
that agreed with us as well. If you're just
I
tuning
mean,
in,
it
we're
would take it
Mhm.
would take a Congress of Austin Petersons and Thomas Masseys and Ron Paul in the White House and five Neil Gorsuches on the Supreme Court to shrink the government back to the confines of the Constitution.
If you just are tuning in, we're speaking to Judge Andrew Napolitano. He is the host of the Judging Freedom podcast, which you can find right here on YouTube and on download on any of your mobile devices and read his weekly column at judgenap.com. Now, I think another point in the pro column, too, Judge, was his hesitancy to get involved in wars. Donald Trump was,
Yes,
someone who was very much against getting involved in foreign conflicts, despite the fact that he did keep the drone program alive and did continue to engage in many of the conflicts that we were already embroiled in. However, from a rhetorical perspective, I think you and I appreciated that at a minimum that he was saying that it's not the role of the United States to be the policeman of the world. Now, I would like to see more of that. And quite frankly, I agreed with what he said last night that possibly Russia might not have invaded Ukraine because they would have been more afraid of Donald Trump than they are of the senile, demented old man in the White House right now. But that leads us to our top.
except the senile, demented old man in the White House is not running foreign and military policy. It's being run by the globalists in the State Department and in the Pentagon. What is he suggesting? That he would have introduced American firepower at military to resist the Russians? Well, then we would have had World War III. I'll tell you where his instinct was good on this, and that's where he suggested that we should withdraw from the NATO treaty. Now, if we were not in NATO, we would not be concerned about an errant Russian missile landing in a Polish village yesterday and killing two Poles, because something like that would not have potentially triggered our legal obligation to get involved in a war against Russia. So his instinct in that respect was very good. Of course, he didn't have the support in the Congress to do that. The president can't withdraw us from a treaty. The Senate can de-ratify a treaty, takes 2/3 of the Senate. That's where Republicans and Democrats, Lindsey Graham and just pick any liberal Democrat, agree on, the need to draw Russian blood. Trump was decidedly anti-war in that respect.
Judge, now when it comes to the question of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, I believe Trump's argument was that he would have been able to get a deal done that would have prevented that conflict, or perhaps that Russia would have been so afraid of Donald Trump. And having lived through the Nixon era, must remember the foreign policy of the crazy bastard strategy. It is quite possible that Donald Trump is, crazy like a fox, pretending to be absolutely insane that will do anything, which is, in my mind, and you and I have discussed this before, saber rattling does not violate the non-aggression principle. Puffing yourself up like a blowfish and making yourself look more dangerous than you really are is a legitimate strategy in terms of foreign policy in order to protect yourself from what someone else might do. Looking bigger, rattling your sabers, but not necessarily intervening or initiating conflict, which is, our mantra. So I believe that's probably that is a possibility that that might be what Trump was discussing last night, but that's not the reality of where we live today. We now live in a situation where our enemies do not fear us around the world. Russia does not respect us. China acts with impunity. Iran acts with impunity, and these are countries that do not have our best interests in heart, and ones that we have to keep an eye on. So my question to
To
you is.
which I say, who cares? They're not threats to our national security. They don't take my property or my freedom. Who cares what goes on in Iran? Who cares what the Chinese do? As long as they trade with us, that's all I'm concerned about.
Well,
The
can I push
fact that
back?
the
Can I
United
push?
States has.
Wait, but let me push back on you here for just a moment, Judge. Put on my George W. Bush hat. Uh, China
Oh,
act.
please don't even wear such a hat.
But this makes it more interesting, Judge. Makes it more fun. China actively engages in subterfuge and uses its technology to undermine infrastructure here in the United States. Like China constantly wages cyber warfare against civilian targets here in the United States. It's a known
Yeah, so what
secret.
are we supposed to do? Bomb Beijing because of that?
Well, I guess I should ask you, Judge. I'm interviewing you, so I'm asking the questions here, Judge. So, what should we do to that? I mean, if China is, I mean, that arguably is a violation of the non-aggression principle. Chinese foreign rogue agents are using computers to break computers here in the United States that are charged with the infrastructure that when you drive into Manhattan, those computers are responsible with directing, traffic across the bridge and for your safety when you cross into Manhattan. I mean, a foreign government is, in essence, committing acts of war on a daily basis. What should we do to that, Judge? How should we respond to something like that?
Well, we shouldn't be killing people. I guess the response needs to be proportionate. Under Aquinas's rules of war, the response has to be proportionate. They haven't killed a single American, as far as I know, with this. So if the foreign policy of the Chinese is to inveigle their way into our computer systems, we have to hire some smart geeks to find a way to resist that. But to suggest that China is a threat to our national security, Iran is a threat to our national security, Russia is a threat to our national security, it's hogwash.
Hmm. I think I would
That's the,
disagree.
that's the Woodrow Wilson argument from World War One. Because I don't like them, or because they're harming a friend, they're therefore an enemy of ours.
Mm. Well, I think I would disagree with you that they're not a threat. I do believe that they are a threat. I think that China probably deliberately unleashed this COVID-19 pandemic on the world through that lab. It probably wasn't an accident. And if we did find out that that was the case, I mean, that would be certainly a violation of the non aggression principle. And that would mean that China did deliberately kill Americans. But that's an argument we can have for another day. I simply don't agree with the neoconservatives that it's our job to police the world or that we should get into wars of intervention. But I think we need a strong national defense to prevent the kinds of threats that these countries do pose to us. I'd like to move on, Judge, to your column. If judgenap.com, you can read on a weekly basis. This one was really good, where you were talking about a program that went on during the Trump administration that involved national security as well as our Fourth Amendment rights. Do you want to explain to our listeners what your column's about this week?
Yeah, the FBI, thank you, Weston. The FBI during the Trump administration, and I can't imagine the president knew about this. This is a problem with a rogue FBI. In fact, I doubt that Jim Comey even knew about this. Spent $5 million to buy Israeli software known as ZeroClick. ZeroClick is a software that enables the user of the software to download the contents of a target's desktop or a mobile device without tricking the target into clicking on it. So when the FBI bought this, they brought it to New Jersey of all places, and they experimented with it. So they probably have. I'm holding up my mobile phone. They probably have the contents of this. If they were right here in New Jersey, it enabled them to download without a search warrant and without notice to the target slash victim everything that's in the victim's mobile or desktop device. When Congress got wind of these experiments, they brought Chris Wray, the director of the FBI, for them, who said, "Oh, no, 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 we just bought this so we can understand how it works." Hogwash. They bought it so that they could use it, but that's what he said. Congress accepted that when Biden became president and learned about it. To his credit, he said, "You're not going to use it. Park it somewhere." And they supposedly didn't use it. They dragged Chris Wray before them again because of these experiments going on. And he gave sort of another nonsense, gibberish argument, the essence of which was, we haven't really used it. We just need to know what's out there. Well, reporters filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the FBI, which, to their credit, they complied with. And the compliance produced documents in court revealing to judges and revealing to criminal defense lawyers that this software had been used in an experimental basis. No judge would allow evidence from this to be introduced in court. These documents that were released from the Freedom of Information Act show that the director of the FBI materially misled Congress under oath, a felony, and that FBI agents themselves conspired to engage in computer hacking, a felony, and yet they're still out there. The FBI is extremely dangerous to personal liberty. It has become a domestic surveillance entity that is not concentrating on fighting crime, but anticipating crime by its algorithms that it uses in surveillance. This Israeli software, in my opinion, is just the tip of the iceberg that the FBI got caught with. Kudos to Senator Wyden, who's a lefty from the left coast, but who leads the Senate in defense of civil liberties, and without whose anger and frustration at Chris Wray's testimony and letters to Wray, which he published, we wouldn't even know that this is going on. Now we know about it. Now we know they have it. It's still in the warehouse in New Jersey. We don't know if they're still using it or when the last time they used it was, but we know it is more likely than not that the FBI and their director committed crimes and they should be prosecuted. The FBI should be defunded and it should be disbanded. It is nowhere countenanced in the Constitution.
Amen.
I
Amen.
know
Amen.
I'm not holding back. You bring me on your show so that I won't hold back.
Hell yeah, that's right. That's why we bring the judge on. Al Johnson over in the live stream says, love Judge Knapp. We absolutely agree. Judge Napolitano, I'm going to take off my George W. Bush hat and put on my Judge Knapp hat. But I have one last question before I let you go. Judge, why don't you run for president?
What, have you been talking to Gerald Celente lately?
Judge Napolitano, host of the Judging Freedom podcast, our good friend. We'll see you next week at the exact same time.